There's not a person on this earth that's worth over $100 million that came by that money. Honestly, why don't you take a look at the old money, the Vanderbilts, the Carnegies, the Gettys, the Morgans, the Hearsts, the Rockefellers. How do you think they got all that money? They just annexed territories and licenses and businesses and killed the native population and imported slaves and sold guns to both the North and the South during the Civil War and controlled the politicians. And they're heroes. They're American heroes.
All right, check. This is Pat Pitboss for the Pitboss Review Podcast. This is our first issue, or our first episode. I am, you may previously remember me from doing the Bad Ideas, Good Stories podcast with Dusty and Rust. Unfortunately, I won't be doing that anymore, so I've moved on to the new project, which is the Pitboss Review. Now, you might be wondering who I am and what this is all about, and what I plan on doing with this phenomenal platform that we have available to us, which I consider pirate radio. And what I'm planning on covering with the Pitboss Review is mostly reviewing commentary, the current events, things like that, where we're looking at activism, recovery, health, fitness, philosophy, culture, you name it, spirituality, because I've been involved with all of those things. I guess part of my resume for who and what I am, really, I'm an old punk rock guy. I've been tattooing since I was 15 years old. I'm 47 now. I started my own tattoo shop in 1999. I'm semi-retired now. I've been involved with political activism since I was about, I guess, the same age, 15 years old. Gone through various different phases, and we'll go through some of the details on this stuff in a minute. Let's see. I started studying martial arts at age 13. I've been certified in a couple different martial arts, or ranked in a couple different Filipino martial arts specifically. I do run a nonprofit corporation for assisting youth at risk to get out of potentially toxic lifestyle choices, being addiction, violence, extremism, gangs, things like that. And I'm a fairly spiritual person. I'm mostly interested in Vedic philosophy, Dharmic philosophy, but across the board, I guess there's a term called omnism, which means that You try to find the thread of truth that connects all of the evolution of religion. And I'm very interested in, I guess, what you would call cultural anthropology in that way, being the evolution from world shamanic traditions to polytheism to, in some areas being mostly the Middle East, monotheism. So spirituality and religious studies is a big part of my interests. So I tend, at least in the last few years, if you've been following any of the Bad Ideas, Good Stories podcast, I was kind of like the half-empty cup guy, and I am very much a half-empty cup guy. I've struggled with addiction for a very long time, and alcoholism and mental health issues like depression, and I've actually had a number of very severe PTSD triggers, which ended me up in the hospital because I went absolutely delusional. Now, that being said, this kind of ties in with my spirituality. In some ways, people can consider breaking down, waking up to some degree. Shamanic societies from back in the day, they would look at what a person saw when they had a vision, as opposed to just Western society that would just basically toss it in the dumpster. They say, you've got symptoms, we need to stop, because we're living in a largely materialist society that's disregarded anything potentially bigger on a metaphysical level than what we can measure with our scientific process. So I was very interested in what happened to me when I had these experiences, for lack of a better term, and the information I thought I was receiving when I went through these delusional experiences. And as I studied world religion, a lot of this stuff came to light where, wow, the shamans talk about this. And I believe now that spirituality in a lot of ways is an amalgamation of psychology and the agnostic attitude of that which we do not know. The ancient, medicine men, once upon a time, would go off into the bush and they would sit around a fire and maybe they would smoke or eat mushrooms or do ayahuasca or whatever. And whatever came to them was a profoundly transformative experience. And those transformative experiences were brought back to the village or to their own personal life. And they would apply those experiences those tangible experiences as something to pass on to other people. So a lot of the Pitboss review, and I guess in 2018 I had a pretty significant breakdown, and I came back. I guess my indigenous friends laughed. They told me, "Oh, you had a vision." Yeah, maybe in some ways I did. I did have a vision, and I still have a vision. And I came back with a goal to help educate and to inspire, and if I can, to enlighten people towards recovery from toxicity in our society, which is part of my nonprofit, or our nonprofit organization. I also am very interested in helping individuals reach their potential in the realms of, again, activism, recovery, health, fitness, philosophy, and navigating what is an increasingly changing culture. Because we are living in a profoundly changing culture. It's we're living in some strange times, for lack of a better term. I like to say we're living in strange times. But when we take a look around, we're seeing a lot of aggression, toxicity, negativity. We're seeing a lot of exploitation of each other. We're seeing exploitation of animals. We're seeing exploitation of our environment. I see a lot of issues. And again, this does go back into my half-empty cup. And you know what? It's very easy. And I wouldn't blame people for just saying, oh, that's a guy's mental health issues. He's got depression, or he's delusional, or whatever the case may be. But I do believe if we look at the evidence that's been put out there, whether it's regarding climate change or regarding political movements, as we record this, we're balls deep in preparation for World War III. As we're speaking, I think we're 21 or 22 days into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the propaganda machine is in full swing when it comes to both parties. What we can see on social media and the news, it's all questionable. It's all questionable right now, and we don't know what to believe. We don't know what is true and what isn't. We're just on the outswing, I believe, of 2.5 years of a pandemic that increasingly divided and split people in different directions. And the Pitboss review I look at as the potential to be pirate radio, as a potential to talk about challenging things, to answer questions, and to ask questions about what's actually going on out there. In a real way. Like, I might crack jokes, but generally I'm a pretty stoic guy. I adhere to a philosophy of resilience. And I've been through a lot, and I really think that we need to prepare for what might come. Because this increasing divided polarization is creating a post-truth dystopia. We're living in a world where you don't know what to believe. In a post-truth dystopia, one person's opinion becomes as valid as a doctor's educated science. And you'll have a random truck driver saying, I've read the science, to a doctor. And I'm sorry, guys, I support your right to have a free discourse and to protest anything you disagree with, but your opinion just isn't as valid as a doctor's. So, the news, when we watch the news and popular media, or when go on, what would you call it, social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, the news used to tell us things that happened, and then we would use our critical thinking skills and our rational mind to decide what we thought about this objective knowledge, this truth that was presented to us. There is a war happening. We weren't necessarily told how we needed to think about things, and then being forced to decide whether it even happened or whether we're getting an objective, truthful version of that event. Now, I know as much as the next guy that we've been living under a propaganda regime for as long as I've been alive. There's been, I guess, what would you say? For example, Israel has been expanding in Palestine for over 70 years. But if you listen to the popular media, nobody wants to discuss the fact that they are just as violent and imperialist as what Russia is doing in Ukraine right now. And there's more than adequate evidence, documented evidence of the United States being imperialist agents as well in all kinds of sovereign nations, overtly as well as covertly or through subterfuge and subversion, placing Contras, arming Contras to overthrow democratically elected governments. But we don't want to discuss that because that's within our borders. As a tattoo artist, it's interesting. I tattooed a guy just recently, and he came into our shop, and he's been living in Canada for about 8 years, and he moved from Ireland. And he pointed out that one of the major differences he's seen between the media he would get in Ireland and the media he would get in North America is that we are not given news or information about what happens outside our borders as much as they are, unless we are being programmed to have an opinion on it. When I watch the news, when anybody watches the news now, we decide which propaganda channel we want to watch. This is where we're at. You can watch Fox News if you want the right-wing bias, or you can watch CNN, or if you're Canadian, you could watch CBC if you want a left-wing bias. All of these. And each one is trying to be the vision of rationality, the vision of rationality. You got the right wing rational thinking and the left wing emotionally rational thinking. And at the same time, they're absolutely ignoring all of the merits of the other side. And this increasing division and propagandization of, I guess, information, of culture, of narrative is a huge issue. So if I designed personally the logo based off of an old Owen Jensen flash piece for the Pitboss review, and it's an eagle. It's kind of like an angry electric eagle facing a double-headed snake, and that double-headed snake represents different factions. You know, the right wing and the left wing narratives that are trying to both bite us and get us involved in their struggle, and the rational individual in the center pillar between these two extremes, imbalances, trying to navigate a post-truth reality, because that's really what we're looking at right now. Do we believe that Justin Trudeau is a democratic, loving, compassionate guy, when at the same time it's quite obvious he comes from a privileged background? He's a trained actor, for Christ's sake, and as soon as he has a hard time dealing with a dialogue with people that are protesting, he enacts the War Measures Act or the Emergency Act. I'm sorry, but I believe in the right for individuals to protest, and I believe in the right, even to a degree, for civil disobedience, and to enact such an extreme measure of totalitarian rule in order to suppress dissident when you don't even want to discuss with people. To me, I don't really trust that. And at the same time, there's this move on the right to think absolutely everything is a grand conspiracy, you know, and whether or not it's like the global elites are trying to create a communist regime, or they're out to take our freedoms, or they want to microchip us and put nanobots in vaccines. I'm sorry, buddy, but you're probably listening to this podcast on your own tracking device. Your iPhone or your Android, it pays attention to you wherever you go. So you need to dial that back. So there's these two narratives on both sides of the thing, on both sides of the fence. You have the rigid individualist capitalists that feel that they can do whatever they want and exploit whoever they want because they are the only thing that's important, and it doesn't matter if they could step on somebody to get ahead. And at the other side, you've got these blind collectivists that really feel that everybody needs to have equal outcomes in life regardless of merit or effort, and both of them are, in my opinion, extremely imbalanced perceptions, excuse me. So who the hell am I to have an opinion? Really, I'm nobody. I'm a tattoo artist. I've done over 6,000, maybe 7,000 tattoos in my life, which means I've sat intimately with that many people to have short or long conversations with them. I've met a lot of people. I'm an old punk rock guy. I did a radio show for punk rock music on CFCR in Saskatoon for probably about 3 or 4 years. Every Friday night we'd go at 12:30 at night till whenever we decided to shut it down. I originally did that with a friend of mine, Sean McDonald, who recently died in out by Hastings in Vancouver, and then I moved on and I did it with my friend. It was first with my friend Shane Barge, who used to play in the band Decontrol, and then my friend Sean McDonald. So we did the radio show for a long time. I've played in like 10 punk rock bands, moving from like kind of like the grunge era to, Black Flag style. I'm moving on to like almost death metal and then back to punk rock. I presently write all the songs or write all the lyrics at least, and play in a band called Standard Bearer. It's like a punk rock oi street punk type thing. When I was a young kid, I was recruited into like a fascist skinhead organization. I was a pretty bad kid. Well, it's funny because I used to think I was a good kid because I only hung out with guys that were doing worse shit than me. But then as I kind of mellowed out in my 40s, I met people and they're like, no, you were a bad kid. So analyzing my past is a big part of becoming the better man that I'm hoping to be. So I was recruited into a fascist skinhead organization when I was like 15 years old, and I hung around with that for a while. When I was probably about 17, 18, got out of that, got into the whole anarchist punk rock trip, and then moved towards becoming a staunch libertarian and then socialist. I was fairly left-leaning from the time I was probably about 17 till maybe 45, 46, and now I'm starting to move towards the right. I am what I would consider myself in the same vein as maybe Pierre Trudeau or even JFK politically. I'm a radical centrist. I believe in merits of each side, right and left, but at the same time, I think that we're moving in a time of extremism and increasing division, that those people that want to remain in the center and not be dragged to one side or another increasingly have to be a little more militant in their stance. They have to be hardline, because at one side, I still ethically would consider myself a left individual, but I'm increasingly being called a bigot or not a totalitarian, a bigot or unwoke by this weird amalgamation of weirdos on the collective left side that are increasingly moving the goalposts further and further away from what I would consider a functional reality. But then at the same time, the right-wing, white supremacist, racist, bigot kind of let the homeless die attitude, I have nothing but criticism for. I'm sorry, like there's no merit for your me first over everyone else ideology. That right-wing, white supremacist, patriarchal, curiarchal attitude does need revision. Now, that being said, we're looking at like the difference between the hardcore capitalist on one hand and the collectivist communist on the other, where you will own nothing and be happy about it, as opposed to the idea on the right saying, I will own everything and I don't give a shit if you are happy about it. So I've kind of come to my present political beliefs through a very long and roundabout journey. This also goes towards my ideas on sexual ethics and LGBTQ and transgender rights and gender rights. I've worked in the sex industry since I was 18 years old. I ran several porn stores. I've been friends with tons of people in the LGBTQ community. I did run an exotic dancer agency for, I think, about 3 or 4 years till our city, after a long, hard fight, shut us down. They successfully shut our business down and ran us out to the boonies. And my partner and I actually met on a fetish website, and we were kink educators for the better part of a decade. We would travel around Western Canada, at least, and teach on ethical expressions of multiple partner dynamics, on shibari, Japanese rope art, on DS, dominant submissive power exchange, and how that works into a consensual negotiated dynamic. And all of these things have contributed to my present ethical activist views. I'd like to think that I've got a balanced perspective from being in extreme environments most of my life. Again, I started tattooing in around 1990. No, actually, excuse me. I started tattooing when I was 15 years old, so I was probably in high school. And just in Buddy's basement with homemade tattoo machines. I ended up scoring an apprenticeship a few years later with Reg Morell, who ran Eye of the Needle Tattoo in Saskatoon for a long time, and I worked with him for a few years, and it was hot and cold because Reg is a bit of a maniac. I love you, Reg, but you're a maniac. And I started up my own tattoo shop with my partner Jeremy Friesen in 1999. We hired Chris Wenzel, who again passed away just fairly recently here, and that was Rites of Passage Tattoo. In 2003, we co-hosted the Flatlands Tattoo Expo, and then in 2010, 11th, 12th, and 13th, I personally hosted the Ink Alley Tattoo conventions here in Saskatoon. Also a martial arts instructor. I was certified in 2000, or I was ranked by One Art in 2007, certified to instruct in 2010. I now study Tadiyaka at Studio 6 in Saskatoon, and I still teach occasionally my own style of Filipino martial arts called Pintado stick boxing. All of this stuff you could find in my LinkedIn, or just leave a message and I'll send you a link. Certified to instruct kettlebell in 2020, and again in 2021 my partner and I became more active in our nonprofit community activism, and we founded Unrest Lifestyle Solutions with the mandate of giving alternative lifestyle solutions to youth at risk. So that's who and what I am, and that's probably going to be the background for what kind of content I cover, or anybody that I bring on the Pitboss Review, and we're going to be running with that. This episode's going to be a little short because I'm just kind of here by myself. I'm not really sure what to cover. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background and review about who, what, where, when, and how I am. And yeah, hopefully you subscribe, tune back in, and if you have any questions, no hate please, leave them in the comments, and we'll see where we go from there. Thanks for tuning in. Have a good day. Peace, love, and granola.